I get why many coaches dislike Eli Drinkwitz, but why Shane Beamer specifically? Let's talk about that and more right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And I do want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first ticket purchase. And on today's program, I want to delve into some ideas. For example, is Mark Mitchell playing center, or really the 5 spot for Missouri? Is that maybe a solution to some of the Tigers' ills in the half court? Plus, if the college football playoff rankings are any indication, you know what, the Gary Pinkel model of non-conference scheduling is indeed alive and well. But I will say this, as much as I love Eli Drinkwitz, and I think Missouri fans love Eli Drinkwitz for the most part, especially his bravado, specifically the type of things that rub a lot of opposing fan bases and specifically, well, his fellow head coaches the wrong way. I do understand completely, for example, why somebody like Josh Heupel would despise Eli Drinkwitz after a beatdown by the Tigers at Faurot Field last season. Eli famously quickly shook his hand, Heupel's hand, after the game and said, "We stand on business, Josh," and then just left. Now, put yourself in Josh Heupel's shoes there. After you just took a pretty good beat down there, you're thinking, well, how about a little good game handshake? And suddenly this guy is basically talking a little bit of smack to you. Now, for context there, of course, this was sort of almost like a bet, it sounded like sort of a good-natured, fun bet between Eli and his players. Like, oh, if we win, I'll dare you to say this to Josh Heupel, that type of thing. So I don't know that that was a personal shot at Josh Heupel whatsoever, but I also don't think Eli Drinkwitz really cares if Josh Heupel took that personally. So just giving you a little flavor here for Eli Drinkwitz and his personality. There's a little bit of pro wrestler in him, and there's a little bit of John Cena in him, I would say. Maybe even a little John Miller in him, insofar as, well, hey, all you Missouri fans out here who listen to me on an everyday basis, you guys love me, and I love you right back. But to opposing fan bases, I'm often the heel. There is no question about that. And you know what? I enjoy that perfect polarization. I really do. Like Eli Drinkwitz, I'll lean into it, especially for the Bucks. I'm not even going to lie to you. But for real, though, when it comes to Shane Beamer, though, I have to say I'm a little bit confused. I know that South Carolina has yet to beat the Missouri Tigers under Shane Beamer, so that bit of annoyance I understand. But I have seen some people on the Missouri beat sort of allude to the fact that, hey, there's not a lot of love lost between Shane Beamer and Eli Drinkwitz, that sort of thing. I don't know. Am I forgetting something specifically here? Again, I remember the stand on business Josh comment. I remember, of course, Eli Drinkwitz donning the Darth Vader outfit and making fun of Dan Mullen. So again, if Dan Mullen doesn't like Eli Drinkwitz, I'd say that's pretty understandable. What's the beef with Eli and Shane Beamer, other than, well, Missouri owning South Carolina the last few seasons? Other than that, I don't really understand it. And honestly, I think one of my best non-Missouri takes, I would say, from the offseason is that actually Drinkwitz and Beamer are incredibly similar, in my opinion. And really, I think this season has really shown that's even more the case than I realized. Remember, Beamer is actually 1 year behind Drinkwitz. If you want to look at it that way, Drinkwitz's first season with the Tigers was 2020, whereas Shane Beamer's first season with the Gamecocks was 2021. And last season, sort of similar to 2022, for the Missouri, a lot of people were going, hey, this Shane Beamer kid, he got off to a great start. Well, I don't know now. Now it's come back down a little bit. We'll see what happens. It's looking like right now the Gamecocks have a really huge opportunity to basically pull a 2023 Missouri for Shane Beamer and have that breakout type of season for his program, and specifically for him as a head coach. So their trajectories have been rather similar here, in my opinion, that being Eli Drinkwitz and Shane Beamer. So that just shows if they're going to continue on that path, obviously they're going to want to beat Missouri this weekend. And if Missouri's going to want to continue its upward trajectory as well, a 10-win season would go a long way. And if you beat South Carolina this season, you got to say that's the best win for Missouri so far. And you got to have all three of these last games, obviously, but clearly that would be the most impressive resume builder for the Tigers at this point. All of this to say is both teams have all the motivation in the world in this one. And not exactly a shock here with the Tigers sitting as 12.5-point underdogs against South Carolina on Saturday. But Eli Drinkwitz basically let the cat out of the bag. He said during his media press events this week that we will prepare for Drew Pine to be the starter this weekend, going a little bit short of saying that Cook was out, but basically that's the obvious expectation here, is that it's going to be another Drew Pine game. As I said in my previous episode, give me more play action passing, give me more middle screens, actually, specifically in this game. A lot of times Kirby Moore and the Missouri Tigers like to throw a lot of sort of swing screens to the outside that lead the receiver to the outside part of the field, the boundary. I think specifically against South Carolina, you saw this for Theo Weiss scoring Missouri's first touchdown in the red zone, by the way, but especially against a team with a really good pass rush. You know, that middle screen, throwing the ball right behind that good pass rush, not the worst idea in the world, especially just put it in the back of your head that this is something that you're going to have to worry about, at least slowing them down a tick or two. And obviously Missouri being able to run the ball effectively will be a huge thing as well. Nate Noel seems to be getting healthier, according to the man himself directly there, being Nate Noel. So a lot of factors need to go right here for Missouri. And to be honest with you, I'm not feeling incredibly optimistic about the Tigers' chances at the moment. And the college football playoff rankings were released last night. And a couple things stood out to me. Number one, it was surprising that Georgia ranked as the 12th best team in the country, according to the CFP rankings. Well, they'd be the first team out. A little bit surprising to me there, but maybe even more interesting, Indiana ranked as the number 5 team in the top 25 rankings there. So interestingly, overall record seems to matter a lot, at least to the committee right now, and especially the unbeatens. Teams like the Indiana Hoosiers, of course, but not the Army Black Knights, oddly enough. If Indiana gets a lot of credit, why doesn't Army? I don't totally understand the difference there. I suppose just the bias of a Big Ten versus a non-Big Ten team there. Well, I'll also say this. I talked a lot about the SEC tiebreakers in the offseason. I'm not going to do an entire rundown and segment on that once again. But I'll tell you this, you better get reacquainted with the SEC championship tiebreaker rules, because they're almost certainly going to come into play. And it's quite possible that it's going to be silly. Just a couple of upsets here and there. Could be a half dozen or more teams that are tied at 6-2, for example. Who knows? Maybe the old coin flip could really come into play. That'll be an entertaining thing to watch, and it'll be entertaining from a whole lot of different perspectives. See who's upset about it, and then see which teams are actually like, oh, actually, maybe missing the SEC title game wasn't the worst thing in the world. Get ready for some potential chaos here in the next 3 weeks or so. And Eli Drinkwitz had some interesting comments about the future of the quarterback position in college football. And you know what? I think there might be some merit here. I think Eli really is on to a new coming trend here. So let's talk about that quarterback trend. Coming up, first though, it's time to talk about Game Time, because when you're looking for last-minute tickets, whether it is to basketball or comedy, theater, football, the whole deal, it's Game Time. And specifically, if you've never been to an NBA game, you got to go sometime. The next time you're in NBA city, it almost doesn't even matter who's playing. You're going to have a blast. I promise you that. And the best place to get last-minute tickets to NBA games, or of course the Tigers as well, is Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. One reason I'm not feeling terribly optimistic in this game is quite simply, well, of course, Missouri's playing a backup quarterback, but even more importantly than that, the Missouri pass protection up front against a very formidable front seven, and specifically the front four pass rush for South Carolina, is definitely scary. But on the other side of the ball, I think the Missouri defense matches up pretty well with a run-heavy South Carolina unit. And specifically, you look at Rocket Sanders at 230 pounds. You look at Lenoris Sellers, the quarterback for South Carolina, at about 240 pounds. A little bit like Jalen Milroe of Alabama in that regard, just in the size department and a physical challenge. And the Tigers defense, it's really going to have to meet that challenge physically in the running game. But I think if they're able to do so, well, I think their biggest problem, which is giving up explosive plays in the passing game, is fairly mitigated with Sellers, a redshirt freshman quarterback who just doesn't have a ton of experience in the passing game, but is no question a big plus in the running game for the Gamecocks. And to that point, Eli Drinkwitz, I thought, had a pretty interesting point just talking about roster management here lately, especially in the new era of the transfer portal and NIL payments and all that stuff. Well, because of this, Drinkwitz thinks there are going to be more dual threat quarterbacks leaned on in the future. And he thinks that's the trend because it's easier, more or less, to build a running game on the fly than it is the passing game. He says, quote, "I think as the transfer portal, player requirement, and acquisition become more and more a part of college football, we'll continue to see dual threat quarterbacks be the lean of coaches. It's a challenge because it's hard to defend the box. Defenses have tried to cheat the box now. It used to be you'd play 8-man space in your cover 2, but they tried to cheat it with a cover 4 scheme team, but it really creates one-on-ones on the outside." To me, there was a lot of X's and O's there. Maybe you didn't quite follow that. Some of you, of course, did. But to me, the real point here is that to build a passing game, it takes time. It really does. And that's something you see at the NFL level. A lot of quarterbacks who've succeeded, and especially ones who haven't succeeded lately, a lot of it's about experience, especially at the college level. If you had years and time to develop, well, not only that, it's having time with your receivers as well, time with the same offense and play callers and coordinators and all this kind of stuff. Well, that's a lot more challenging than, say, getting your rhythm in a read option game or in a quarterback run-heavy type of system. That's just simply easier, not only for the quarterback, but usually for the offensive line as well. So I do think there's a lot of merit to what Eli Drinkwitz is saying there, and who knows, maybe that'll cause Missouri to go a little bit more run-heavy, looking for a quarterback in this particular transfer portal cycle this offseason at quarterback. Now, other than Brady Cook, obviously the big injury on offense everyone's talking about this week is center Connor Tollison, who is out for the season. Drake Heismeyer filled in admirably well, I think, against Oklahoma in the last few minutes of the ball game, but obviously with a full plate of minutes and snaps this week against as talented of a front seven as you could see. Well, that's a scary proposition, but I'll say this, Eli Drinkwitz says we have a lot of confidence in him being Drake Heismeyer, of course. He had to do this a couple of times during fall camp with a couple different injuries during the day for Connor, and I thought he did an excellent job on Saturday. He doesn't have to replace Connor. He's just got to be the best version of Drake he can be. Well, how new aged there from Eli Drinkwitz. But seriously, I, of course, completely agree with that. And Drinkwitz also points out that while he hasn't played this particular role before that they're going to ask him to do on Saturday, he has played a lot of football. This is his fifth year in the program, I believe, and he's also a big part of the special teams unit. He's the middle shield on the punt team and apparently takes an extreme amount of pride in that, knowing all the checks and calls and looks and all that stuff. So he is definitely used to being out there in important positions and important games and directing traffic for his team. So we'll be seeing a lot of that from Drake on the road in a really tough environment. Definitely going to be a challenge for him, but glad to hear that Eli Drinkwitz has the utmost faith in him, it would seem. Now, for years now, Eli Drinkwitz, well, his fourth down management and decision-making, when to go for it and when not to go for it, has really seemed a bit haphazard and random at times. For instance, against Oklahoma, the Tigers early in the ball game from the Oklahoma 39 decided to punt on a 4th and medium distance, I believe. Well, later in the ball game, 4th and 1 from their own 44, the Tigers decide to snap the ball, run a jet sweep to Luther Burden that ends up losing yards for the Tigers. Now, I have to say this. On paper, that's a head scratcher. I did want to at least go back and look at the play, so let's do it right now. Now, when this play was live, when I was watching from the stands, I assumed that the Tigers were probably going to try to draw Oklahoma off sides here. But then when the ball was snapped, I was going, boy, they must really like the pre-snap look here. That's all I can say. But considering the play is a jet sweep to Luther Burden, you can see him on the left side of your screen here in the yellow gloves, yellow undershirt, and yellow socks. He's kind of tough to miss, isn't he, folks? Well, there he is on the left side there. But what I noticed is, as for your Missouri, you know this play is going to be run to the opposite side here. Well, here's the problem. If this is an outside-oriented play, which it obviously is, there's a couple Oklahoma defenders here to the outside of the Missouri tight end, Brett Norfleet here. That means that Norfleet is really going to have a tough time setting the edge, first of all, on this defensive lineman here. But number 23, the safety, his presence just behind that lineman and to his outside as well, to me, that's an immediate kill the play scenario, because when you run it forward here, well, what happens? 23 definitely killed the play. He's able to get upfield here, Missouri unable to set the edge. Burden, unfortunately, has to go 5 yards backwards, and that play never had a chance. If 23 isn't there, yeah, he probably beats 28 to the outside. Number 2 makes a really good play as well here for Oklahoma. But it's really not even about what happens after the snap. It's about what happens right here. Pre-snap, if you're Drew Pine, if you're the Missouri coaching staff, you got to call timeout there. You got to do the kill, kill, kill sign or something, because that was just simply never there. We can question the timing of it as well, but to me, it's just not even a play that should be run, even if you like the going for it on 4th down in this spot. And you know what? When it comes to Missouri basketball, a thought experiment led me to something. I was saying, hey, if I need a basket or a stop, just one, what is my 5-man lineup going to be in each of those scenarios? Well, it led me to realize probably who the most important players on the team are, and Should Mark Mitchell maybe be playing the 5 a little bit more? Could that be the cure to what ails some of this pedestrian Missouri half-court offense right now? Let's talk about that coming up. First, though, FanDuel. Let's get ready to tackle the NFL action this weekend with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch during a game, you can check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com today to join. And you'll get started with $150 once again in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So if I need one basket, let's say I can call timeout with 25 seconds left in the ball game. If I'm Dennis Gates, who are my 5 guys that I'm rolling out onto the floor? Well, no matter which way you look at it, I think Missouri's best offensive lineup has Mark Mitchell playing the 5 spot. And along with him, I think if you surround Mitchell, who's a good back-to-the-basket player, inside player, but a guy who can take you off the dribble as well, especially guys at the 5 spot. If he's already taking players off the dribble at the 4 spot, well, it's going to be even harder for 5 men, I think, to stay in front of him there. You surround him with enough shooting, and suddenly I think you've got a pretty doggone good offense there. Clearly, I think Tamar Bates would be one of those players. I think Caleb Grill would be one of those players. And then I think, of course, you need a playmaker as well. So either Anthony Robinson or Tony Perkins. I would probably lean toward Robinson, at this point. And really the only other option there would be Marquez Warwick to be your lead playmaker. But I haven't seen enough of Warwick, obviously, to make that claim just yet. But then that 4th spot, it's almost got to be a taller shooter. There's really only 2 guys that fit the bill to me. It's either Jacob Cruz or it's Trent Pierce. So you look at that 5, though. Anthony Robinson, Tamar Bates, Caleb Grill. Let's say Pierce and Mitchell, or Cruz and Mitchell, whichever way you want to look at it. Not exactly a lot of rim protection in that lineup, is there? That is not a lineup that's going to be getting a lot of stops. For as good as Mitchell would be, I think, as a 5, and it would also be good for him offensively because he wouldn't have to step outside as much. I think the spacing makes a lot more sense for just the whole team as well when he's at the 4 versus the 5. But the problem is the best lineup defensively does not include Mark Mitchell at the 5 and really doesn't even include Mark Mitchell at all, to be honest with you, because I think the best defensive lineup, well, the good news is it does include 3 guys that I just included on the perimeter: Anthony Robinson, Tamar Bates, and Caleb Grill. I think those 3 perimeter players, there is some actual good news there for Missouri that I think those top 3 guys can reasonably be considered your 5 best offensive guys and among your 5 best defensive guys as well. The problem is when you get to the front court, because I think Missouri's best defensive lineup includes clearly Josh Gray, the center, the transfer from South Carolina, and Aiden Shaw as well. The problem is the offense just gets quite a bit worse with both of those guys in the game unless Shaw is able to expand his game offensively a little bit. I'm going to have to see that before I actually believe it, to be sure. So really, if I think about if I were on the opposite side, how would I attack this Missouri basketball team? Well, defensively, it'd be pretty simple. I'd get back. I wouldn't worry about crashing the board so much. Just get back, stop Missouri from getting fast breaks, and sag off of their questionable shooters. And then I think you can really gum up the works in the half court for Missouri. And then offensively, it's fairly simple as well. Attack when Gray and Shaw are not in the game. Just attack the basket and then get those bigger guys away from the rim in pick and rolls when they're in the ball game, because clearly that's not going to be Josh Gray's strength. And I think you can get him in foul trouble in those particular spots. So to me, the big plus for Missouri doing this exercise here is that actually their backcourt is pretty good, I think, in terms of two-way players. But the front court, I just don't know how we're going to be able to settle those 4 and 5 spots that is going to be good on both sides of the court. I think we've got an offensive crew that works, and I think we've got a defensive crew that works. But in the front court, I just don't really see how those things cross over. That seems like a problem that's going to be really tough to solve for Dennis Gates. I've said I think Missouri needs to lean into more of a defensive identity this season. Maybe Dennis Gates will feel a different way, but if you're going to have Mitchell at the 5, I think that's going to cost you enough defense that you'll have to be a really elite group offensively, and I'm just not sure I see that either. So to me, the conclusion is kind of what I've been saying for the first few weeks of the season here. Missouri's got to lean into their size and defense a little more this season, even if that's not really the natural way and the preferred way that Dennis Gates likes to play stylistically. And with all that being said, thanks for joining me as always. And coming up, I'll have my final preview and predictions for the South Carolina game on the very next episode of Locked on Mizzou.